Good morning, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and start so that I know people will probably still be wandering in, but just to reward those of you who've been sitting through Bhutanese dance performance, we should turn this off and start. Let's see. All right, great. And now, come back over here. And this should start. Great, super. All right, so good morning. My name is Thornton, and this is my colleague Evelyn Frangakis, and we're from the New York Public Library. And we're really delighted to be able to talk with you this morning about a project that we did to assess our entire audio and moving image collections at the library. So we're going to talk to you about that assessment, how it got started, and also the next steps that we're taking as a library, which are very big, very bold, and very exciting. But it's a lot of work to come. A lot of work went into the assessment, and a lot of work ahead. So we're eager to talk with you about that and to hear questions that you may have about the assessment process and also the prospects for the future. I'm going to start by giving you a big headline that it's really better to know, even if what you know is really kind of disturbing. So we're going to give you some really big numbers today and some kind of astounding figures. But just to start by putting this in some context, the library has really one of the greatest collections of audio and moving image material in the world, and it's really a very important collection. The collection is used by a lot of people, but it could be more used if it were more accessible, and we'll talk to you about some of that. But just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that are in the collection, it includes rare, unpublished performances, original performances, and not just New York City, but global. You were just watching Bhutanese dance performance. It includes field recordings of indigenous peoples, their music, also dialect tapes. It includes oral history collections with either a geographic focus, an ethnic focus, or a professional or topical focus. It also includes things like the AIDS activism video collection, which includes original recordings of footage of protest marches and die-ins and things like that, so actual events that were occurring. And it also includes things that we're recording right now. The library has a very active program of original documentation, including an oral history project in our New York City neighborhood branches, as well as a world-renowned collection of original theater performances, which is part of our Theater on Film and Tape archive. So a lot of different kinds of collections, a lot of different topics, and a lot of different uses. And the library's audiences are really varied. So it includes performing artists, so people who are in the theater and music and dance. It includes students, teachers, all kinds of educators, scholars, so people in academia, as well as writers, journalists, freelancers, entrepreneurs, all kinds of people use the collection. So it's a broad, deep collection with a very, very broad audience. We are talking about a survey that was funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and it is a comprehensive survey. We're going to talk about all of the aspects. We really wanted to get a soup-to-nuts view of how much it costs to maintain a collection like this and to make sure that it's accessible into the future. We also wanted to get a sense of the investments that the library was already making and the impact of the library in continuing to collect this material. And so it's going to inform our acquisition practices as well. So what the result is, and it's a result of a lot of things coming together, is a more systematic and integrated approach. And Evelyn will talk to you about some early steps of integration, but there's even further integration that's happening now so that we can have a better sense of the full capacity that the library has to deal with collections like this. So where we started, we were doing some strategic planning in 2010, and we looked at sort of the most unique and distinctive kinds of collections that were in the library, and we really started to elevate the profile of the audio and moving image holdings that we had, which had grown in a lot of different divisions. So there are actually, I think, 9 different curators and parts of the library that have significant audio and moving image collection holdings. We also identified the audio and moving image collection as an at-risk collection because of the various formats that are obsolete and are very, very hard to provide access to. And we wanted to take a proactive approach and deal with this. We had done sort of a preliminary survey, but we really needed to do something much more thorough to get a sense of the scale that we were actually dealing with. So we began talking with the Mellon Foundation around that time, and they encouraged us to do a real full assessment, and they were generous enough to fund it. So Evelyn is going to talk about the steps that she and her team took to really start building a more integrated program, and she'll talk about the methodology used for the assessment survey as well.
Thanks, Anne. The library undertook a reorganization, a very major reorganization in 2007 and 2008, and as part of that reorganization, we took all like-minded areas of the library and centralized them under their designated areas, and preservation was one of those areas. So we took what were historically created labs and curatorial units whose units had a deep investment in media collections that had established their own curatorial labs for their media and brought them together as a distinct organizational unit, audio and moving image unit, under the central preservation program of the libraries. This was a very important early measure for us because we built on the excellent work that was done by the curatorial units. What you see in this slide is one of the moving image labs. And so that was built, that particular lab was built by the dance collection. The engineers, audio engineers and moving image specialists shared a suite of studios and did their own work for their own units. Bringing them together as a unit really allowed them to collaborate in ways that they hadn't before. And much of that was because we needed their input to help us think about how to consolidate these labs in a way that would allow us then to continue serving the units from which they came while also allowing us to spread out their services throughout the rest of the institution where their services were needed. So that for us has been a really great collaboration. The library had a 3-year fellowship program that was funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and that program was to help nurture the next generation of what we would call hybrid preservation administrators. And so each of our 5 IMLS fellows at New York Public and 3 IMLS fellows from Yale rotated through our labs and were exposed to this type of work that you wouldn't find in a traditional graduate program. After we decided that we wanted to do a deep dive into our collections to get a sense of what we had and what shape it was in and where was it and what were the overall conditions, we started looking at what other institutions were doing across the country, and we found a number of really interesting and good models. In that, we decided that we had an affinity to the approach that Indiana took, and so we approached Indiana to talk with them and to visit. We spent several days on their campus. They were incredibly gracious to partner with us. They allowed us to use their assessment tool as a beta test for impartial assessment of our own collections, which is MediaScore, and I'll talk about that momentarily. But we also really liked the process that they followed, and so we decided to model our entire approach in the Indiana way. So we chose to have an executive sponsor as our chair, and Anne very graciously agreed to do that. And that was really important in having her be invested in the process in the way that she could be, but also in making sure that the library's executive team was fully informed of what we were doing to the degree that they needed to be informed. We developed an audio and moving image working group, and that was really the core team that did a lot of the heavy lifting throughout this assessment, and that had representation throughout the organization, from the curatorial areas, from the labs within preservation, from the administration within preservation, to the IT side of things, as well as the general administrative side, which included Anne. That team met on a weekly basis. No matter what, we had established weekly meetings to touch base. Sometimes those weekly meetings meant we were going through some really technical and dense issues. Other times it was a quick check-in to say, this is where we are, this is what we're doing, just to keep each other informed. And that commitment was very important in keeping the process flowing. Our contract partner was AV Preserve. I'll talk about that momentarily as well. But this AMI working group also had bi-weekly meetings with AV Preserve to keep this process going. The Indiana model also had a wonderful set of guiding principles, so we decided that we liked that concept, and they have 13. We winnowed it down to our own, and our own is a collective of 8, which I won't go through today, but it is on our website. And then I wanted to say that in addition to the involvement I've already discussed, there was really broad involvement across the entire institution. All the curatorial areas that had AMI collections were very involved in the process. As Anne already noted, there were 9 areas throughout the research libraries that have important, sizable collections in AMI area. And I think that broad involvement, this structure that we developed, was a key to the success of this project. Okay. So the Mellon-Funded Assessment had 3 phases to it. When we decided that we wanted to do a deep enough dive into the collections that no one area within the library could undertake this on its own, we decided to approach AV Preserve as our contract partner after talking to a number of organizations and individuals that we thought could engage with us. And we had a frank conversation about the kind of time frame that was needed for this actual assessment. And we decided we needed 18 months. And then we made a conscious decision to do it in 12. And everyone on the team within the organization needed to be on board with that. And we did get everyone's buy-in to do that. We knew we had an enormous project ahead of us. We knew we had an enormous challenge ahead of us, and we wanted to get on with it. We didn't want to take the extra 6 months and just delay the process, because we know that we are essentially racing against time. Most experts in the field will say we have a 10 to 15 year window, so we're looking at a 15-year window, so let's get on with it. And so that meant, of course, that we had to focus on the kind of approach that we were going to take that was going to allow us to do that aggressively in a 12-month time frame. So it was a 3-phase project. The first phase was AV's conversation with our curators who had the substantial collections in these areas. They looked at all of the individual formats that we have in the collection. They looked at all of the spaces where collections are stored, both at the multiple locations in the city and various locations outside of the city and outside of the state. Phase 2 was essentially taking all of that massive data that they had collected, analyzing it, and developing recommendations. Phase 3 looked at our workflows, our equipment, and our facilities. In the years preceding this assessment, we had done an internal look at our own workflows and our equipment. We wanted an external review of that as well, and we wanted AV Preserve to look at what we would need to do if we were going to expand our effort. What would we need to do in terms of physical facilities within New York City, because our labs are almost at capacity right now. I can hire one audio engineer and that will max out all of the studios that we have. So in order for us to ramp up internal production, we needed that kind of assessment. Okay, so part of this process built an enormous amount of data, and that was one of the things I wanted to highlight, is that this deep dive then resulted in, I want to say, like 15 spreadsheets, and this is a tremendous number of spreadsheets with very detailed data, including, well, I'll get to the slides of what we discovered that we had. This slide is just a sampling of some of the data that we collected, and this comes from the Indiana assessment tool MediaScore. So MediaScore is an application that was developed by Indiana that incorporates prioritization scoring system for formats based on obsolescence and degradation. So it has built on other tools from the past, and as I mentioned earlier, as part of our partnership, Indiana allowed us to beta test this, and this was really important for us because we considered this as a key performance indicator when we were looking at what the labs do and could do. And then another key performance indicator for us was looking at labor hours, because if we look at simply the amount of output from the audio and moving image in-house labs, it's not entirely reflective of their contributions to the organization's mission. Particularly in these years leading up to this assessment, they are often pulled away to do a variety of other things, including working on this assessment, but doing educational programs for graduate students who want to come in and look at the work that we're doing, other visitors, other library-oriented goal work, but that's not necessarily production-oriented. So we took a look at labor hours as one of these key performance indicators. So there are some formats that require more labor hours per content, and if we don't do a kind of a weighting system in looking at these, then of course if we're only looking at production, we're really only then looking at focusing on the easier things to preserve, right, to reformat, and those may not necessarily be the most at risk or even the highest priority. So this is helping to give us context about how we look at the work that is being done so we can help shape the prioritization. Okay, life cycle costs is another thing that we looked at, and this
We know this is itty bitty on the screen. We're sorry about that. We just wanted to give you a sense of the kinds of data that was collected.
Yes, and you should be able to see this when the slides are put up on the CNI website. So one curator on the AMI working group asked this wonderful question early on of AV Preserve about, can you help us determine what are the financial implications of accepting a donation of a single recording?
Right.
So can you help us figure out when the donor comes to us and says, we want to give you this, or we want you to buy this, how we can engage in a meaningful conversation to help them understand then what our NYPL investment is in doing this, and perhaps that will help us shape conversations about taking this in as a partnership with some additional resources. So we looked at audio, video, and film, and what you can't see on so well on the screen are, we looked at the pre-digitization costs per item, the digitization cost per item, the cataloging cost per item, the storage cost per item, on down to look at an investment per item per year, and a total investment. When we looked at this, and I'll talk about this, there are further implications that I'll discuss with relationship to the investment then made. So this not only helps us talk about what's coming in and inform conversations with donors, but it helps inform our own conversations about the investments we've already making made. And already made. Yes, as Ann just said, already made. All right, so the findings in the collections, as we thought, we have over 800,000 audio and moving image materials in 9 curatorial units across 3 of our 4 research libraries. We determined that we have 60 formats and 4 asset types. So by asset types, I'm talking about originals, preservation copy, commercial, and the fourth,
one other one.
And the fourth is escaping me at the moment, only because I'm trying to think of it, right? We looked at 1/3 of the collection as being the highest priority for preservation. So of that 800,000, 228,000 came out as the top priority. And they came out as a priority essentially because they were determined to be unique, rare, or otherwise critical to the mission of that specific division that held those materials, right? Mission critical. And then we looked at the cost of inaction, which was really helped the conversation within our own group and with the administration. So the cost of inaction, there is a tool that AV Preserve developed and has on their website. So
I'll actually go to it for just a second so you can see.
Anna's really good at maneuvering it.
So this is developed by AV Preserve, and there's this option here to analyze your collection. You do have to sign in to do this, but just to give you a sense of how it works, you can adjust these figures. You can sort of say our collection is definitely more audio than it is video. So, well, actually, here we go.
That's right. Our audio collections are actually 4 times the size of our moving.
And then it starts to give you, your investment analysis when things stop becoming accessible, and so forth and so on. So, anyway, it's a very interesting tool. But
it was a very useful tool for us. So we looked at the past and ongoing investments that include costs such as acquisition costs, curatorial and division staff costs, administrative and management staff, preservation staff, processing, description, reformatting, rehousing, storage, equipment. You get a sense of how detailed and in-depth this analysis is. And for us, when we put all of that data in, we determined that we have invested an average of $2 per item over the past 40 years. So our total investment that for our collections, just of the prioritized collections, is for all 800,000 was 64 million. For 228,000, then if we don't get to their preservation, we're looking at a loss of investment of over 40 million. So that's a pretty sobering statistic driven by real data. So it's not a guess. All right, so that is a very useful tool. So now we move to recommendations that were made as part of the survey. So I can tell you that we did 4 scenarios as part of this process, and the scenarios looked at maintaining the status quo. So I just want to tell you, maintaining the status quo, we chuckle about it now. It was really sobering when we first heard it. So I've already told you we have a 10 to 15 year window, and at status quo, current state, the good news is that it will take us a little over 40 years to get to the video. The audio is a little more of a concern because it'll take us almost 1,100 years to get to that. And to look at the pre and post processing aspects of all of that work, it will take us well over 2,000 years.
And really, we did realize through this assessment, even more than our hypothesis suggested, that a real bottleneck is in the pre-processing and post-processing for this material.
Right. And we looked at what the implications of that were. Certainly there are times when the labs or the processing staff will get an AMI item to work on that they actually can't, because it might only have one viewing or hearing left, and then they know automatically that goes to the preservation labs for reformatting first, and then it turns around and is processed. That's not necessarily a neat way to do it. Certainly complicates things, but sometimes we do need to do that. So the scenario was current state, a slight increase in what we would call existing capabilities, but slightly upping the digitization of materials with a minimum increase in staff and facilities. Then we looked at really an increased capabilities that was going to look at an optimal scenario of preserving the entire body of that 1/3, that 228,000. I might as well throw in the budget for that scenario. It is $121 million. So that was another incredibly sobering data point that we had to digest as part of this process. Not that any of the budget scenarios are not sobering, they all are, because even at the lower end, we're looking at 70-some million. But when I talk about these budgets, I want you to know that we looked at everything. We didn't just look at reformatting costs. Every conceivable data point that you can think of that would go into taking these collections in and caring for them for the long haul in every possible way, those data points are part of these calculations. And that tells us that we are very well informed in moving forward and developing strategies for which approach to take. So the final approach we looked at was, if we throw $5 million a year at it over the next 15 years, what can we save and what's the potential for loss? And even, I will tell you, throwing $5 million a year at it is pretty staggering in terms of loss as well. So the loss percentages for us, I think, were equally sobering to the budget news. Okay. And when we get to questions, if people have specific questions about each of those approaches, I'm happy to go into those scenarios. So every scenario that we looked at a 15-year window of opportunity. Some of the scenarios take other than the $5 million budget a year, all other scenarios looked at ramp-up activity, right? Because obviously even if we were to throw $5 million a year at it, we don't have those resources instantly to be able to do that. And then the key recommendations that came out of it, as Ann already mentioned, is that we are looking at changes in acquisitions policies and in life cycle management practices. All right.
Okay.
Immediate next steps.
Yes. All right. So within what was really particularly fortuitous is that we identified this problem or raised its profile in 2010 during strategic planning, and every few years we do strategic planning again. And as a whole library, we have been doing strategic planning in this calendar year, so in 2014. So the timing was actually really great. And during that strategic planning process, we held a number of positions vacant to see what the outcome of the strategic plan would be and where the greatest needs were. So we actually were able to use existing vacancies to create a number of positions that are going to directly impact tackling this problem. And so that's within this current fiscal year. And that's an allocation, and including the storage, of roughly $2 million right away that we were able to reallocate toward this effort. But there's obviously a lot more to do. And one of the things that we realized was even though we had done some centralization in prior years of our archival and other format processing units, because they were not completely centralized, we still didn't have the best handle on the entire capacity that we have for processing collections. And so we have just, in the last couple of weeks, taken steps to further centralize those departments so that they are now in one unit, essentially. So, this was a practice that is done in a number of divisions of the library, and certainly happens at other libraries, where in some cases we have divisions that are curatorial divisions that are about collecting audio, so recorded sound or moving image or both, on a particular subject. And in other cases, we were taking incoming archival collections that may have had video in them and sending those videos to another unit to be processed. So we were splitting things up by format, a lot of inefficient practices. And so what we're doing now is bringing all of the processing of collections from, even before it comes in as an acquisition, there is a plan to deal with it. And it's going to be in the queue before it even gets to the library. And we're also going to have a plan for tackling everything that's already among our holdings because of this survey and other surveys that we've done. So it's exciting that we're going to have a better handle on the entirety of our capacity at the library to really tackle these collections. The other thing that we need is much further engagement of the curatorial staff to really keep the priorities in check. So, in a number of cases, as the assessment was going on, we determined that we had multiple takes of a particular interview, for example. So you have, multiple cameras, that kind of thing. There might be multiple copies. Evelyn was speaking about the different kinds of assets. But also there might have been, multiple versions of something. And so we need the curatorial staff to, make those selections even more, and to ensure that the collections that are truly unique and most mission critical get into the workflow. That's really, really important. What's great from an administrative and fundraising perspective is that the way this assessment was done, we are able to have a lot of great detail by format, so that by format we can tackle this problem, but we can also fundraise by subject as we need to, because we did these deep dives within each of the departments and divisions. We really got a good sense of what's in there, what needs to be preserved, and so we can, and the costs for those things, so that we can start to tackle things from a subject approach with foundations and individuals who care about those particular collections. So that was a particularly useful outcome of this project. And we are currently, even though we've got the budget for the remainder of FY15, we're currently developing budgets for the future years and how we're going to really ramp up, and developing along with that a fundraising strategy. And I think it was really critical, not only that we were going through strategic planning while this working group was finishing its work, so the timing was really fortuitous, but also that along the way we were able to keep our colleagues in the development office, in senior administration, the president of the library, who's our chief fundraiser, everybody informed of not only the significance of these collections, but some of the scary numbers about the data loss and the loss to our cultural heritage that we will suffer if we don't deal with this problem. So, yeah, go ahead.
And we were able to take advantage of some other things going on, as Anne was saying, during this process. So, for example, at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the Moving Image and Recorded Sound section is undergoing a renovation, and part of this renovation actually started for the Art and Artifacts collection, right, which is a floor beneath it, and the Preservation Division has been actively involved in establishing appropriate storage facility environmental parameters for those spaces, both working with capital planning and working with the collection staff. And with a new curator for Moving Image and Recorded Sound coming on board, is a deep interest in all of these areas, we're able to work out a better storage environment for those collections. Those collections are actually all coming out of that space for renovation. And when they come back, we will have a much better environment for those materials. And that is part of the strategy, is how do we buy time
get environmentally,
exactly, so that we can buy ourselves extra time to move forward with the reformatting part of it. Another area we're looking at is our off-site storage facility that's shared with Columbia and Princeton, and enhancing its capacity for both cooler and cold storage to take in some of these collections that are in New York that can then be moved to the Princeton facility. So those are two other important areas that we are looking at as a complement to the strategy.
So we want to talk about sharing approaches next?
We do. So I have given you just glimpses of some of the approaches and the tools that we've used during this project, and we really think that both the approach and the tools that were used, either those that were developed as part of our project or by others such as Indiana and AV Preserve, can really benefit other institutions who want to tackle this. And you don't need to have a collection of 800,000 to use these tools, but certainly useful for smaller collections as well. So we want to be able to share that information with you. The NYPL summary of this process is already online at the link you see there. We are continuing to load additional information to that site. We are looking at how much of the 236-page report we can make publicly available to help inform others of the process and our work ahead as well. So this is where we will be putting up more information, and we'll put up this slideshow there in addition to it going to CNI as well.
It'll probably be most everything except for like the salary information, that kind of thing we'll take out. But the other stuff, I think, it's important to not have shame about these kinds of collections. I mean, I was actually asked by a trustee when I gave this a similar presentation about what we found in this survey a couple of months ago. Does this mean that we've fallen behind in preservation, that we haven't? And it's easy to say, yes, we have. I mean, yes, we have, but we all have. I mean, this is a really huge problem. We're not alone in having this issue, and now we know the scope of the scale of the problem, and so it forces us to act, and we're doing that. We're taking some action, as much action as we can in FY15, and then we're developing a plan for going forward. And I think it's better to share the problem and to face it head on, rather than thinking, oh my God, it's just too massive. Are we ever going to invest $125 million? I mean, we're not going to invest $125 million right now. We can't do that. So, but figuring out what we can do, and and knowing what we need to do, and figuring out what we can do is better, much better.
I love that Anne walks around telling people, but now we know. Now we know. It's better to know.
Better to know.
And because of this deep dive and the way in which we approached it and what we looked at, we also came out with some really interesting opportunities, I'd say. So, at one point, AV Preserve threw a list of needed positions at me, and I had a frank conversation with them about, I understand this and I see it, but as an institution, we have to look at ways in which we can use the budget as effectively as possible. And that part of that means not encumbering long-term costs, that if we don't need to encumber long-term costs. So the bottom line is we can't hire the I have the list of positions. It's quite a numerous list, and it's entirely legitimate, but quite a challenge to develop that process. So in looking at that, then challenged us to say, okay, what else can we do? So we looked at opportunities to reduce costs and get another perspective on the budget. And just by category, I will tell you, we talked about long-term vendor contracts as one way to gain some headway in cost savings. Looking at accelerated rates of outsourcing, thinking that the more we outsource now, it's going to cost us less to do now than it will after there's more media decay and more technology obsolescence, and there's just less availability of expertise and equipment and services out there to do that. We also looked at micro-funding opportunities, much so of those of you that are familiar with our menu project, where we allowed the public in to help us process that collection, looking at that as a possibility for audio and moving image collections. We looked at other strategic partnerships. Who else can we partner with? Where are our strengths? What can we contribute to someone else where someone else might have a different type of strength? We've got a lot of expertise and collections. We only have limited in-house capacity. How can we partner with someone else to make a go of this? And also a conversation about public-private partnerships. And then just looking at consolidation of NYPL efforts, which actually Anne already addressed, and then a phased and prioritized approach. So we know we're looking at this from a 15-year window, but as I said earlier, we can't tackle it equally year by year. And looking at what can we do year by year, where are our biggest priorities, where can we make the headway, and then start going down those parallel avenues.
Yep. So do we want to play a treat?
We have a treat
for them?
For you now.
And then we'll
Shall
take
I set the
questions
stage?
as well. Yes, please do.
So for Preservation Week 2014, one of our audio engineers looked at essentially 100 years worth of recording, which given the recordings that you're going to see actually represents 80 years of what is on our collection. So these are our collections. You're going to hear Carmen for 3.5 minutes, but every time you see the format that you're going to walk through, and the first one is a wax cylinder on our archaeophone, or a cylinder rather on an archaeophone, which allows us to play all types of cylinders, including wax cylinders, on through digital technology. It is actually being played on what you're watching.
And the audio engineer did a beautiful job of seamlessly weaving these together. So you do have to pay attention to what the screen actually says, or you'll miss the transition. It's actually quite remarkable. So let me see if I can get this going here. Oops, there we go. Okay. That's the amazing. That's the amazing work of Danny Spardella. He did a wonderful job. And you know, if the Bhutanese dance didn't do it for you, maybe Carmen will help you wake up this morning. Thank you for spending this time with us this morning. And if you have questions for us, we're here and we're happy to answer them. Thank you very much.